It's Song Talk Radio.
Welcome to Song Talk Radio, the show with songwriters talking to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting, most of the time. We share tips, tools, and techniques, and together we become better at writing songs. I'm your host, Neil Modi, and with me, my co-host, Phil Emery. How you doing, Phil?
Neil, I'm excited. I got to tell you, I'm excited.
You really sound like it.
Well, I am excited. I am just, it's going to be a pretty exciting show.
It's going to be spectacular. And we're very happy to have our audio engineer from the before times, when we recorded in the studio, Mr. Don Thompson.
Yes, I heard you invited me out to mix things up a little bit.
Yeah, but we're just mixing it up a little bit here. Oh boy! And Don, for folks on YouTube, you can see his totally bomb home studio, and he's also a fine singer-songwriter in his own right. We met him at the songwriters meetup, and continues to be a good friend to the show. So thanks for joining us, Don.
Thank you for having me, guys.
All right, and for the rest of you folks out there, please send your comments and questions to @SongTalkRadio on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or feedback@songtalk.ca, and we'll share your thoughts on the show. And please visit songtalk.ca to see the show post for this episode and to find links to things and resources that we mention, which you're going to want to do for today's show. Before we get to tonight's special topic, if you haven't gathered by the title of the podcast already. Just once again, we have dropped officially our Songwriting Challenge 2023 to write a song in an unusual mode, or a mode you're not familiar with. And the deadline is looming for us. Phil, how's your song coming along?
Well, I'm it's a little bit of an unusual situation for the moment, but I am working on it when I can.
Okay, cool.
But hopefully I'll be able to get on top of it. It's it's something I've been wondering about for many years. I'm looking forward to actually getting into it. Yeah,
me too. Actually, earlier today, I before I was talking about attempting to write a quote unquote classic rock song in Mixolydian, and I've been listening to a little bit of more classic rock, last couple of days, and
what do you mean by classic rock, though?
Well, okay, so the song that I hit was an Eagles song. Why can't I think of the title now?
Hotel California, or
in Living in the Fast Lane.
Ah, great song.
Right, and great guitar riff and very cool. And I looked up the chords on Ultimate Guitar, which I don't think were actually entirely correct. But trying to play along with my piano, it kind of felt like it was in Mixolydian because it had that flat 7 thing going on it. But I was trying to figure out the guitar riff, and playing it on my piano, jumping octaves and stuff. Like, it's not something I would ever do on the piano. Guitar is just
very different instrument.
It's a very different instrument. It's never the kind of riff I would write on a piano. But yeah, starting to do my research. In other words, just trying to wrap my head around what Mixolydian kind of sounds like, because I'm kind of getting the groove of what it might sound like.
Cool, and, John, you're working on one as well, right?
Yeah, I haven't written anything yet.
No, neither have I. Don't worry about that.
I've been kind of slow at it, but hopefully it'll come quick. I mean, honestly, the last 2 songwriting challenges I've done, there was one with Chad, was it? What's his name? Yeah, Chad, then the last Song Talk one that was done, I wrote them like 2 or 3 hours, whole thing. Yeah, cool. So I'm hoping this. I'm crossing my fingers. Maybe it'll be when I just sit down and just do it.
Just simmer for a while. And of course, for you, Don, and for everyone else out there, we do have a resource page. Check out songtalk.ca on the sidebar. You'll see Songwriting Challenge 2023. Click on that. There's a bunch of videos. There's a bunch of diagrams and charts and stuff. There's lots of material there for you to sort of check out, learn a little bit. Because I think for this one especially, it's not maybe something you can just dive into. I think a little bit of research is maybe a good thing to go with. Okie dokie. And tonight we are continuing our ongoing series of episodes helping you out with your home recording studios. In the past, we've done home recording basics, we've done MIDI, and we did an episode on MIDI 2.0 more recently. And we're going to link to those earlier episodes in the show notes. So check out songtalk.ca for that. And for tonight's episode, we're going to be diving in on tips for mixing and mastering in your home studio. And we've gathered a bunch of tips together. We're going to see where the conversation leads us. But this is not a structured lesson sort of thing. We're just going to be bouncing around. No pun intended. Actually wasn't, but we bounced around a little bit and going off for a bunch of different tips. So before we get into that, any preliminary thoughts about this, guys?
Well, I would say, just like writing songs, when it comes to mixing and mastering, there's many ways to do that. I don't think there's really a wrong way. I mean, there's better ways, but or easier ways, perhaps, depending on how you're working. But yeah, there's many different ways, and you just have to try them. So anything I say tonight is what works for me, or what didn't work for me. And hey, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, absolutely true.
One thing I would like to mention is that because the tools for doing this are so readily available now and so affordable, like back in the 80s, to do even a tenth of this stuff would have cost you $10,000 to $20,000. It would have been outrageous. But now, you buy a laptop, you can sort of put in your songs and do the recording. Being a recording engineer is a separate skill. There used to be a time when there was people who worked at studios, all they did 50 hours a week was engineer. They didn't even produce, they just engineered. And then you had other people who just produced. And then you had other people who just played session. They're drummers or bassists, and you had people who were just singer-songwriters or just songwriters. Now there's this urge to sort of do everything. And that's really dangerous because, we have to be honest, we're not Prince. It's hard to do everything really, really well. Prince could. So don't feel bad if you start off doing this and it doesn't come out sounding professional, because this is a separate skill. I was talking with someone the other day about performing, and being a great live performer is a completely separate skill than being a great songwriter, which is a completely different skill than being a great player. So give each thing its respect and its due, and allow yourself to suck for a while, because it takes a while to learn how to do this stuff,
Yeah, and there's also the happy mistakes that sometimes happen too.
Yeah, it's a lot of trial and error, a lot of error,
Definitely.
a lot of growing pains. But just echoing what Dom was saying, it's like I always feel like when you get to a certain point with it, you do realize that it is essentially a creative process, just as much, maybe not as much as, say, songwriting is, or whatever. Like there is a lot of technical to it, but the thing that I always like to think is that we all know what good songs sound like. We have albums that we love. We have tracks that we even if we don't necessarily like the song, or they're not our favorite songs, they're our favorite productions, and they just sound slamming, or they sound really beautiful and gorgeous and lush and whatever, right? And so it's like that old meme from the first Karate Kid movie from the early 80s, where Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san are doing their bonsai trees, and he tells Daniel to close his eyes and then picture the tree in his mind, open his eyes, and he gives him the clippers. It says, make like your picture, clip the tree so that it looks like your picture. And he says to him, how do I know if it's the right one? He says, if it comes from inside you, it's always the right one. So we all know what good songs sound like. So the whole idea with mixing and mastering is make it sound like you want it to sound. and Don's right, there's many different ways to do it, but at the end of the day, it's all judgment calls. There is no right or wrong. It's like, I'm going to do this because I want this to sound a certain way. And these are the kind of moves that you can do. But then it's the same thing like with songwriting. You want to do it with intention and make all your decisions sort of based on something, and not just because the tools are there for you to use. We want to grab the right tool for the right job for the thing that you want to achieve, the specific thing you want to achieve.
Although that can be hard to know. Like if you just if you just know that it's not sounding right,
Yeah.
like you've done this and okay, it's not sounding right, you're trying to fix it, you're just gonna try different things because you don't know, and it takes a while to figure out how to do these things because it's a skill that you have to build up, like like playing an instrument or learning how to sing. It's a skill.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It does take a lot of trial and error. I've made many, many mistakes as a producer and as a sound engineer over the years. But okay, so let's get into a little bit more specific. So the thing I wanted to start with, because I think this is kind of foundational to everything about home recording, is this idea of gain staging. And if you go onto YouTube, there's a zillion and a half videos telling you how to gain stage and what it all means and everything. And I want to relate it in terms of a mistake. One of the very first mistakes I made, like this is almost 20 years ago now, when I first went onto like a home recording forum and started learning about this stuff. That the advice at that time was that 0 dB, 0 decibels volume is your sweet spot. And so I tried to record everything in my digital system as loud as I possibly could, which is the biggest mistake you can possibly make. And actually, and I suffered that for a long time. And then my mixes sounded terrible and distorted and not good. And finally, I realized that when people say 0 dB is the sweet spot, they're talking about the analog realm, where you had the VU meters, the little meters with the volume, or with the meters with the needles. Sorry. And 0 dB is kind of at the 2/3 of the way up the maximum scale, and you can actually go beyond 0 decibels into the positives, +6, +9, +12 decibels. In digital, 0 dBs is your absolute finite maximum. If you go above 0 dB, you get digital distortion, which is not analog distortion, does not sound nice. It's not a nice crunchy guitar sound. It's literally very unmusical and nasty, and you want to avoid that at absolutely all costs. So the biggest thing you need to realize is just record at a conservative, quiet level. If your meter in your DAW is going up sort of 2/3 of the way up when you're singing, or you've got your guitar plugged in, or you're recording anything, even through a virtual instrument or whatever, if it goes about 2/3 of the way up, that's probably about the sweet spot for what your level should be. And once you start doing that, you realize that your mixes kind of magically come together a little bit easier. Like everything just sort of gels a little bit more. Where people get into a lot of craziness with gain staging is they try to math it, and they try to get a meter in there and try to make it exactly -18 dBs and gain everything on every single one of their tracks so that it's exactly that amount. And that, to me, I've done that before myself, and it's very tedious to try and optimize, quote unquote, all your tracks. But I think the general way to look at it is just make sure it's not too loud, make sure it's not too quiet, just make sure it's somewhere in the middle there, and you're going to be okay. Because the other thing you have to realize is, with the old analog days, you had to record loud because there was a noise floor of the tape machines and things like that, and you had to have what they call a signal to noise ratio. Your signal had to be much stronger than your noise, otherwise you'd end up with a noisy recording. Digital systems, your digital audio interface, even the cheapy ones, have no noise floor. There's no inherent noise as a result of your recording equipment. So you can record actually super quiet and boost up the volume afterwards, and it'll still be okay. Like, it won't have any inherent noise in it just because you recorded it moderately conservatively or even quieter than that. So
yeah, now some people like to have, when you are looking at your meters, and you'll have to have some ideas on your meters, that they like to have the signals sort of bouncing around -18, and other people do it at -12. And the idea is that one of those two equals 0 dB, and if you're using emulations of old analog gear, that's expecting that sort of more kind of 0 dB-ish kind of signal. Now, you guys, do you shoot for -12? Do you shoot for -18?
I use both. I use -18 on my individual tracks, and I use -12 on my mix bus. So, because I can slam the mix bus a little bit more the way I work it, and it still works out fine. It's because it's the plugins that you're going into sometimes. Because that's why you want to stay in the -18 sweet spot most of the time, or even -12 is okay, because your plugins are expecting certain levels, and if they're emulations of analog gear, they're designed to behave in that same way. So if you slam the hell out of them, they're going to just completely clip, and there won't be any room left for it to do its little magic.
Yeah.
Especially the analog emulations.
Yeah, for sure. I tend to do. It depends on the material,
Yes.
because there's average levels and then there's peak levels. So percussion, I usually let them peak around -12, right? Guitars, pianos, vocals, anything like that, average volume -18. So it depends, and that's what VU meters are good for, is average levels, or RMS, whatever they. I know they're not exactly the same, but for intensive purposes, they're pretty much the same. But with percussion, you can let it peak a little bit higher, and it's kind of okay.
Yeah, it's a transient. Yeah.
Are you able to, in your particular DAWs, are you able to change the way the meters are displayed?
Yeah. In mine, in Cakewalk by BandLab, you can set them to be average level only, peak level only, or both. I usually put it at both, and then it actually it stickies the top peak for like a few seconds or something like that, like whatever your current highest level is, and if it is clipping, it'll indicate it in red, and it'll sticky it there.
Can you change the colors and stuff?
No, but it's kind of green, yellow, red. Like I'm not, yeah. I'm happy with the green, yellow, red. I think you can. There is a theme editor in Cakewalk that you can change the color of literally everything. So I'm sure the meter marks is one of them.
With Cubase, you can change that, and I have it so that it's, sort of green up to, I think, -18, and then yellow between 18 and 12, and then red above it, and that really kind of helps me kind of keep things.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can edit the actual thresholds where the color changes. That's an interesting question. I have to look into the.
How about you, Don?
I use an old VU meter emulation plugin. I really like meters because they're sort of in your peripheral. You don't have to look at specific numbers. It's sort of like a speedometer. When you're driving a car, you're not looking down all the time. It's just there in your peripheral, and you can see it. And I use this one. It's a small guy in Klanghelm. It's a plugin, and I've been using it for years now, and I love it because I just love it. It behaves like an analog VU meter, and you calibrate it. So my single tracks, I calibrate to -18, and like I said, my mix bus, I'll calibrate that meter, and they're in stereo or mono. But I'll calibrate the mix bus one to -12, and then I'm just seeing relative. I'm just looking at that 0 level. And if it really like buries the needle for too long, okay, wait a minute, got to back that level down. It's a bit too much. But yeah, that's what I use. And I still use other other plugins too that are in Logic, because that's my DAW of choice.
Right.
Especially when especially when bouncing things down to like put up on YouTube and all that. Optimum levels for streaming, because you will be turned down if you go too hot.
Yeah, we're going to get to that one.
Yeah, we'll get to that later.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean the basic message here, folks, is record moderately loud. Because the other thing too is that because we're used to hearing mastered loud music on Spotify, on whatever, and it's super loud. When you get into home recording, the first thing you realize is I want my stuff to sound just as loud right off the bat, but that's not how recording works. The mastering stage at the very, very end is the last thing that boosts the volume up, so it's quote unquote radio ready. But while you're recording, you can turn up your speakers, you can turn up your headphones, you can enlarge the waveforms on your screen. There's a way to do that in every DAW, and you can just make things appear bigger and sound louder in your monitoring. But as long as your actual recorded material is conservatively not quiet, but conservatively loud, then you're going to be okay. is things just breathe better when they're recorded moderately.
One thing I want to add before we move on, though, is when you're adding plugins to your chain, because all DAWs are able to add plugins, very often the plugins will make things sound louder, and we have the tendency to equate louder with better.
Mm-hmm.
So AB, like, bypass the plugin and make sure that the plugin isn't really adding any volume. And that way you sort of keep it consistent all the way through. Because if you start adding plugins after plugins, that volume can really add up, and it can make things kind of very tight and mucky.
Yeah, especially compressors, especially saturation plugins. They can add a lot of volume. So there's always the opportunity to reduce the gain after the plugin to bring it back down to the same level as it was going in. And that way you actually hear what that plugin is doing. You actually hear literally the effect of the compressor, the effect of the saturation without it just sounding louder and going, oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, you got to watch out for that. What is that Fletcher-Munson curve? That's what's fooling you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your ear, that is.
Yes. Okay, so Don, you wanted to talk about mix bus processing. Why don't you define that first, and then we'll get into the
mix bus processing. Well, that's just everything. I would call that the glue. So you've got all your tracks, and they're all coming down to your stereo mix bus. We're talking stereo for now. We can talk Atmos as well if you want, but anyways, we're just going to talk stereo for now. And it's all coming down to that stereo bus, and then you want to put some glue on it. So I use a very basic one setup. I have an equalizer, and it's just like really fine amounts if needed. Maybe a little bit of low, rolling off a bit of the lows, or high passing, if you want to call it that. Maybe put a little sparkle in the air band, like up above 16K, if your mix needs it. And then I go into a compressor, and that compressor, actually, I've got saturation turned on it. I love the sound of saturation. I think it's something that we've missed in digital, and it's really, I see a lot of saturation plugins in the last few years, like specifically just saturation. And then usually a limiter, because you want to limit, because in digital there is only 0 full scale, right? You can't go any higher. It turns into an awful bad sound. So, and that's basically that's all I ever use, right? Unless I do something special. Whereas, I don't know, you were talking about Life in the Fast Lane earlier. Didn't they flange the whole thing at some point in the song? It's got so that's where you might put that on the mix bus. If you're going to flange an entire mix in a certain section, you'd automate it. But other than that,
the drums flange too? I don't remember.
Yeah,
Listen to it closely and find out. But so do you set up your mix bus sort of early and then mix into those processes, or is it after the fact?
Yeah, well, at the beginning, I'll turn most of it off. Right. When I'm first mixing, but while I'm producing and actually, tracking and all that, I will have those plugins turned on, because it kind of tells me what it might sound like once I put them back on. But I'm very, very subtle. Like the amount of compression, for example, you might have heard of SSL bus compression. This is a thing, right? On the old consoles, and they have plugins obviously to emulate it. I just use the Logic compressor with similar settings to what the SSL bus compressor does, and I just tickle the needle. So maybe like 1 or 2 dB, that's it. But there's a bit of saturation turned on there, and so I'll probably work in that. And then when I actually go to mix and say, okay, I've done all the production, I've done all the recording, I might turn them all off and see what I get. But I keep really light on the mix bus. I did try another technique like years ago called top-down mixing, where you have, like, some people have a lot of plugins on the mix bus and they mix into it consistently. But I took them all off and I listened to what I had and I was like, oh my, I didn't like that. It sounded it didn't appeal to me. And I went back and I said, yeah, this is much better for me. So like I said, everybody's a little bit different. Top-down mixing is something that someone came up with, I guess, or several people came up with and tried it because it was supposed to be quick. But the problem is it masks all your problems on your individual tracks. So if you have something going on in an individual track, you can't figure out what it is, and you've got all this mix bus stuff happening, well, you might want to turn some of it off, because you might not know that really you should be going back to the track, not the mix bus is not the problem. So maybe a track is doing something and it's maybe there's too much low end coming from a particular track, and it's throwing everything off. So I'm very skimp on the mix bus. I probably have more meter plugins going on the mix bus than actual audio plugins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I take a kind of a similar approach. I've tried the top-down mixing, and similar to you, Don, the problem I found with it was that I sort of saved it in my default template, and then depending on the material that I'm working on, depending on your tracks, they could be a little bit louder or a little bit quieter than last time. And if it's a little bit louder, then it's hitting that mix bus compressor a little bit harder, and it's making everything really, really squashed. And then you're wondering, and then I kind of forgot about that I had stuff on the mix bus. and then I'm like, why is it sounding so squashed? And then finally I discovered that, okay, because if you're gonna do it, you really gotta do it with intention, and make sure that, and like Phil was saying, make sure you're gain staging as you go along each plugin, because you keep adding volume with every single little plugin. Then by the time you get to your mix bus, the compressor you had on your mix bus that was just, like you said, Don, just tickling the needle, is now slamming it.
Yeah.
And subtle changes can have a big impact that far down the chain. So it's really it's a judgment call, and it's a practice thing. If you want to do top down mixing, or you want to do your mix bus stuff after the fact, there's a great video I saw on YouTube. A lot of the stuff that I learned about mixing was from a channel called Recording Revolution. Graham Cochran, the dude down from Florida, who actually started sort of almost before YouTube. Like he's been around doing the home recording studio tutorial thing for a long time. I actually bought a couple of mixing courses from him, and there were like video courses in 720p, like really small. And but he did everything in Pro Tools, but I could apply all his knowledge to Cakewalk. But he released a video talking about mixing versus mastering, and this whole mix bus question of do you mix through the mix bus? Do you leave that stuff on when you send it off for mastering? Do you take it off? And all those sorts of things. And his contention, which is more of a philosophical one, and this is something I try to adopt as well, is never wait for the next stage to make your song sound better, your track sound better. When you're recording, set up your microphone so it sounds the best that it can, and it's closest to what your vision for the song is. When you're mixing, make it sound the best that it can, whether you're using mix bus plugins or whether you're not using mix bus plugins. Just make it sound good. Like I said before, we all know what good songs sound like. Make it sound good, and don't leave it to some magical mastering engineer to all of a sudden just make it golden, because that's not how mastering works either. But every stage of the process, you gotta make it sound the best that it possibly can, and that makes it easier to make stuff. Like if you're recording well at the source, then the trickle down effect is that everything will become easier.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And when you do put a compressor on your mix bus, make sure you use those filters if it comes with it. And if it doesn't have it, you might want to use them, because I high pass the trigger for the compressor. So you don't want your bass causing your compressor to be pumping constantly, because it does screw at the whole mix. The levels are going to be going up and down like a yo-yo. Whereas you want to let the bass pass through. I usually, it depends on the material too. I'm usually around 80 hertz and below is not affecting the compressor, because you will find this sort of pumping effect, unless you want that effect, but it becomes a little bit too much, because the whole mix is going up and down, right? And you may not want that. So you want to let that bass pass through unaffected by the compressor, and everything else is getting a little bit of a squeezing down, I should say.
Yeah. That's a good tip, actually. Okay, Phil, you got a little tip for us?
Sure do. Just on the bus processing, SSL, the company that actually makes SSL boards, the mixing boards, where the SSL compressor, famed SSL compressor, comes from. They actually have their own plugin now of their bus compressor that everyone makes a copy of, and I actually A/B'd their version with basically every other version I could find, and theirs was so much better. It was frightening. Wasn't just like, oh, it's a bit different. It was just like, oh, this is why everybody uses it. It's not cheap. It's $229. They had it on special for $29, and I was able to pick it up for that. So I wouldn't pick it up for $229. It's just not worth it for me. But for $29, it's pretty amazing. So it's the SSL bus bus compressor, and there's a free trial, so try it out because you throw it on everything and everything sounds clear and better. It's amazing.
But what do you mean by better? Does it sound like tighter, more glued together? Like,
you know what? It's hard to imagine. Suddenly things sounded clear. Like you could hear sort of the knocking of percussion sort of more clear. It seemed to get rid of the muddiness somehow. I don't know. I tried to replicate the settings with other SSL plugin emulation plugins, and I could get close, but not quite the same. It was pretty frightening. So
okay.
well worth a chance.
Neat.
One thing is to if your DAW allows this, in Cubase they have something called an arranger chain. An arranger chain, and what that is a track, and you basically make a block and you say this block is a verse, and then this block is the pre-chorus, and then this block is the chorus, and then you can sort of set it up to play those blocks in any order that you want. And what's great is you can set up a whole bunch of different kinds of arrangements and then export it and then listen to it and go, hey, do I really need that second verse? Or what if I make that what if I make the chorus shorter? It makes it really easy to do sort of on-the-fly changes, sort of on a macro level. So I'm sure all DAWs have something like that, but in Cubase it's called the arranger chain, and it's been a godsend because you can set up, like your intro. You can have like your full intro, and then you can select the last half of the intro, and then you can export a version with the full intro, export a version with just half the intro, and get a sense of how it works. So sometimes being able to hear stuff in real time, objectively, really helps.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah, arrangement tools are great for like just checking out various arrangements of the sequence of events and see how it just yeah, it was a more recent addition to Cakewalk last couple of years. And it's pretty cool because you can do a rearrangement of things, and then you can say commit this arrangement, and it'll actually in the actual timeline now, instead of the playhead jumping around, it'll actually commit it and rewrite it so that restructure it so it's now place for me to be in order the way that you've got your arrangement. So you can actually commit it if you want to. So it's a handy tool. Yeah.
John, do you use anything like that?
No, but Logic has something where if you want to like skip something or a section, you can just block out the section. It's sort of the opposite of doing looping, like making the DAW loop on a section. Well, what it does is a skip section, and it comes to that and it sees it and it just jumps.
Okay.
You can I think you can put in a few of them. I've only used one at a time, but I imagine you can put more than one in. So I guess that's sort of like it, maybe. I don't know, but not quite like what you guys were explaining. Yeah,
and if I with the arrangement tool, like some songs, it's interesting to rearrange stuff like that. Some songs, the structure is a structure, and you don't want to futz with it too much. And it's a handy tool, but not necessary all the time, I don't think. But yeah, okay. Let's move on to the importance of the high pass filter. This is something that every junior mixer encounters, is this buildup of low and low mid frequencies. So you end up whenever your first few mixes are either going to sound really, really muddy or really, really harsh. And then you learn through trial and error how to get things more balanced. But one of the things that is consistent on every single mix that I've ever done is a high pass filter. That's an EQ filter that sweeps away a lot of the low frequencies to the extent that you need it for any given track. And the general wisdom is you high pass everything except for your kick drum and your bass guitar. I think there's some caveats to that, but generally that's kind of the wisdom. And the other wisdom is you move you sweep your high filter up on, say, your guitar track until the guitar starts sounding thin, and then you pull it back a little bit, and that's what you know. But the point is that and when you sweep away a lot of the low frequencies, especially from like guitars and pianos, and vocals and things like that, that may pick up a little bit of rumble. They're not musically relevant to the part necessarily, and to just get them out of the way makes more sort of sonic space for the bass drum, for the kick drum, and for the bass guitar. And that and it's by eliminating stuff, getting stuff out of the way, that the bass and the bass guitar then sound clearer, in general. One of the mistakes I made, one time I was mixing a track for a client, and the export I did, she came back and said, "Why is the acoustic guitar sounding really squeaky?" And I listened to it again. I was like, "Wait, I didn't even notice that when I exported it. The guitar sounding really squeaky. All I can hear are the fingers moving on the frets. Like, what's going on here?" And I was trying to go in and trying to find those frequencies and trying to EQ the squeak out and everything. And then finally I realized I had just put the high pass filter too far. I put it too deep. I'd actually robbed it of the mid range, the goodness of the guitar. And so all I had to do was one simple thing: is just pull that high pass filter back.
Piano player.
Yeah, exactly.
You can definitely go crazy with that.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to be careful not to push it too far, because if you do end up high passing everything really deeply, then your mix ends up sounding harsh, because then all you're left with is high frequencies. You don't want to get too far into the low mids, because the low mids is where the good stuff is. And you got to work hard to balance all the different instruments, and that goes back to arrangement. And are you just trying to mix a bunch of instruments that are naturally colliding with each other? You know, if you want to double your guitar, then you do, you're strumming chords with open position chords, and then you do another pass of the guitar, bar the chords into a higher octave, and you got, two different sounding guitar parts that combined together then sound rich, as opposed to recording open chords on both passes and combining them two. It's just going to get muddier and muddier. So it gets back to arrangement, and do you even need two guitar parts doing the same thing? That's
I play guitar. You always need two.
You always need two.
But yeah, no, what you just said about playing them in different positions on the neck definitely helps. Like if you take the same chords and play them in different facings, it really fills out the sound. You almost get a stereo guitar sound. I mean, especially if you got good right hand control and you can like pretty well get that rhythm the same on both. It almost sounds like one guitar, but it sounds so full and rich by having them in different voicings. Right?
Yeah, it ends up sounding like a 12 string or something like that. Cool.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the high pass, yes, I high pass everything pretty well. Even bass guitars.
Even bass guitars and kicks, depending, like to a small extent. Yeah, depending on the material. Because even with that low end stuff, one thing I've realized, you have to decide, especially if it's like even like a pop song or a rock song or whatever, you have to decide, even electronic music, you have to decide, is your kick gonna occupy the low frequencies, or is your bass guitar gonna be down there? Like there's the low frequencies, and then there's the low mid frequencies. And they can't both be occupying both, but is your kick more snappy? Because kick drums do have mid high frequency content, and bass guitars do too. The plucking of the string emits like a higher frequency. It's not all, even though it's called bass, it's not all bass. And you have to decide which one's the dominant one in the lower mids. Is do you want the kick to be more thuddy and the bass guitar to be more round and bottom heavy, or do you want the kick drum to be the really low thumpy, super thumpy thing, and the bass guitar then is not as low, but it's kind of in the mid low range? Like you have to make those decisions depending on the material and depending on what you want. But you can't have them fighting for the same sonic space.
I've heard a good rule of thumb is the busier one, between the bass drum and the bass guitar, the busiest one should have the upper lower. and then the ones that have less playing less notes has a lower one.
Yeah, because of the fact that those notes are holding on, right, and they're rich, and you want to get that low end. Yeah, that makes
Yeah, so if your bass
sense,
guitar is just doing boom, 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 something like that, then you put it in low, and the kick's going bam, ba-dee, 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 ba-doom, and then you tuck it up. Yeah, that's a really good rule of thumb. Never thought of that, but it makes a lot of sense.
You can make a bass guitar sound a lot more defined if you sort of like high pass it a little bit sometimes as well. I mean, if it isn't like if it is busier, for example, so this is instead of the whole notes, is if it's busier, you can make it sound a lot more defined if you kind of do a little bit more high passing on it. Because what happens is there's a lot of rumbling, and when this stuff's coming out of your speakers, whether it be earbuds or speakers, it's competing for spectrum, and the low frequencies are power hogs. So when you got two things trying to compete for the use of the power coming out of those amplifiers, whatever it may be, sometimes you have to, if you take a little bit of that low rumble out, all of a sudden it seems like it's actually punchier and more full sounding, even though you've removed some of the low component.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's surprising sometimes, but again, don't push it too far, or it'll just end sounding.
Oh, you'll know.
Yeah, you should know. Cool. Okay, Phil, you got another tip for us?
Yes. Something that really helped me in the last little while is being with a reference track. And I tried lots of different ways of doing this, but having the main track playing, and then having one of the reference tracks playing into a Q mix, which is like another output in your mixer section. But I have found an amazing little called ADPTR Audiometric AB, and I got it through Plugin Alliance. I have one of their subscriptions, and this allows you to actually, just with a click of a button, AB your track with a reference track. It also the plugin also matches your reference track with your track, so you have the volume correctly. And it also has filters so that you can just listen to just the low end part of your track and AB it with the low end of the reference track. And you can have, like, I think 12 or 13 different reference tracks set up, so you can click between them all. And then you can just listen to the lower mids. Listen to the lower mids of your track, and lower the mids of the reference track, and it's just with a click of a button. So it's really quick. So you get kind of more of a direct comparison between the two. Whereas I found with the other ones, there was enough time that you didn't sort of hear the differences quite as much. And it gives you spectrograms, and it's really, really good. And you can get it cheap if you get one of the Plugin Alliance. They have specials and so on, but it's right. Oh well, it was $200, and now it's $29.99. So definitely
everything is getting up for $200 down to $29.99.
They're following the Waves model.
They're following the Waves model. Yeah, exactly.
Everything's $29.99 at Waves now.
Yeah.
It seems.
Yeah, and then that's been the case for a long time as well.
But that's really helped me a lot.
Yeah. That's a really good. Reference tracks. How do you feel about reference tracks, Don? Do you use them?
I used to. I don't use them anymore, really. I could find them like, if I was changing environments all the time, so say I know what something sounds like down here, and I was going to someone else's place, that's where I think I might use more reference tracks, because you get into another space that's foreign to you and foreign to your ears, and you got to get used to listening to things in that particular room. And it depends if they're using any sort of correction stuff, because I use monitor correction as well. And it's really helped me, because I listen to stuff on all, like in the car and in my house, on different stereo systems in the house. And when I do mixes down here and I take them, they sound like out there to me now. But this took years to figure out and train the ears and whatnot. I guess that helps as well. So But the reference tracks, yeah, they would be really handy for like if you go to different places and you're mixing in different studios, definitely going over to a friend's house, perhaps. Right.
And I'll reference I'll refer back to that YouTuber I was talking about before, the Recording Revolution, because he's got a great video on mastering. It says master your own songs in 10 minutes. And he uses one of his own songs and he references a Maroon 5 song in the video, but he's very clear about how to see the differences between your song and the reference song. And you're just looking for kind of brightness and darkness and kind of very broad stroke sorts of things. You're not zeroing in on individual little instruments. You just sort of, the vibe, like what's the overall, is it punchier than mine? Is it darker than mine? Is it brighter than mine? And those are the sorts of things, is it as loud? Even though the volumes are matched, does it still have, that amount of like, is the dynamic range similar to your reference? Those sorts of questions, and it's just about tweaking yours so it sounds closer to the reference. It's never going to sound exactly like the reference, because obviously you're not that artist, you're not that band, and you didn't record that song whenever, in a professional studio. So it's never going to sound exactly like it, but it's just a matter of nudging yours so it's a little bit closer to the reference. So referencing is a great tool. Unlike you, Don, I referenced before, not as much anymore, because I kind of, I've had my monitors for like 20 years and I kind of know what they sound like. And I don't have the car issue anymore. I've ever put a mix out in the car and it sounds
fine. Yeah. Yeah. I used to have all kinds of issues when I took my stuff to other stereo systems and whatnot. So yeah, I think it's just time. Like
the problem now is, does it sound good on your phone?
Oh yeah. No, I do that too.
Yeah.
I take it and I have a big window well in my downstairs bathroom, and as I'm brushing my teeth and all that, I'll take mixes that I've done just recently and put them in you put the phone in the window. Ever see the phone in the cup idea? They get a bit more bass out of it. That kind of idea. I put it in the window well. It's seriously, it works.
Yeah.
And I had a friend of mine who mixed something. He's a professional mixer guy. He mixed something for us as well. And it sounded good on the phone. It sounded good on the computer. It sounded good in the studio. It sounded good on the home stereo. It's like, man. So yeah, try it on everything.
Yeah. You have to test it on everything.
And when you hit it, and when you can tick all those boxes, hey, you're getting there. Your ears are probably getting trained as well, but it takes a while.
It does take a while. And it takes a little bit of like really focused listening, like listen on the phone and write down some notes about what you don't like about how this sounds, right? Or write them down in bullet points or whatever. And then when you get back in your studio, you literally just have to go through a checklist, because then you're trying to remember the experience of what that sounded like. And, it helps to write stuff down and take, lots of notes about that. I do that with clients too. If I'm doing a project for a client, I send the mixes to them. They literally send me back in an email, this is too loud, this is maybe too bright, this is maybe too whatever, like, all the little bullet points. And I usually have to go through them one by one, or I do that myself on my own mixes. Just sit back and listen to them and just make a couple of notes. Okie dokie. Okay, let's get into a little bit of mastering stuff. So okay, this as well, like sort of the same thing as the gain staging thing. You go on YouTube, there's a zillion different opinions about mastering, and should you do it yourself or should you send it to somebody else, and is it okay to do it in your own cheap home studio without acoustic treatment and all this sort of stuff. But I want to start with you guys and just ask you, what does mastering mean? Don?
For me, it's kind of the glue that puts everything together and getting it at the right level. So when I master something, I make sure I hit the right levels. Now, it's a bit of a changing ballpark or game all the time with what the streamers are doing, right? And how they're setting levels. So what I do is I use the LUFS meter. I aim for -14 LUFS. That's the general one for now until they change it again. But all the streamers are a little bit different. Now, some streamers will turn you up if you're too low. And I say some, not all. All streamers will turn you down if you're too high. So I go on the high side because you're going to get consistency across all the streaming, whether it's YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music or Pandora or any of them, right? If you go a little high, and when I say go a little high, maybe 1 or 2 dB too high, there is a site called Loudness Penalty. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. I use it all the time, and it doesn't upload your track. You just drag your track into it, and it gives you all the different levels of the big streamers, not everybody, but the big streamers, and it tells you, are you going to get turned up or turned down?
And it's pretty cool because you can click on each of them, and it literally turns it up or down depending on what.
Yeah, so I'll go a little bit high, knowing they might turn me down, but 1 or 2 dB you can afford that. But if you're being turned down like 9 or 10 dB, that's a problem because your mix is, in comparison to other stuff that's being streamed, might not sound that good. It might actually sound really flat, like with like no dynamics left to it at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's all changing, right?
Aside from setting that final volume level, what do you mean by it glues everything together?
Well, I'm talking about maybe I misunderstood. Like as far as it's like it's on the mix bus, like on the main bus, right? The compression and all that, and then mastering. That's it. That is my mastering. What's on the mix bus? That's it. I don't go through anything else. I don't do a separate process or anything. So when I'm mixing my own tracks or someone else's tracks, I'm hearing what the master is going to be. That's it, all the way through the chain. I don't fold it down or bounce it down, I should say, and then go back and put it into the DAW again and then tweak it. There are some exceptions if you're doing an album. So I did that with our album. So I bounced out all the tracks, and then I put them in one song. So there was like track after track, so you could actually hear the flow of them as well. And I guess you could call that the mastering, right? To make sure all the levels between the songs were, reasonable. There wasn't like a sudden drop on one song. Someone runs over, turns the volume up, and then they're like, what the hell? And the next song he's running over to turn the volume back down, right? So if that's what you call mastering, yeah. But generally when I'm doing just individual tracks, I'm mixing mastering all in one. That's the way I do it.
Okay,
so
cool. How about you, Phil?
For me, I've actually I have a lot of respect for people who are professional masters because there's more to it than you think. I've had the fortunate to work with some very in a very Forrest Gumpy kind of way. I'm able to work with people like Nick Lagona who produce the Police and stuff like that. So when you do tracks with those kinds of people, they tend to get mastered. The head guy from The Cure, when he does an album, he'll send it out to multiple people to master. Because I found the way different people master the track is very different.
Mm-hmm.
It depends a lot on what you're doing. If you're just working from home and you're still learning, I don't think this is really that important. And you could probably go through an automated, mastering service and you'd probably be fine. But if you're doing something that you really want to release on a professional level, I always get a professional to master because the difference a professional makes is astounding. Like, it's not just a little bit. It's just like, wow, one guy made us sound like 5 kajillion times better than we did on the first Parkdale Hookers album. And we had two companies master the second album, and they did a different feel for it. And but it sounded clear. It sounded more professional. It just brought it up to that next level. But it costs money. Like, it's not cheap. It was like $150 a track, or maybe $200 a track. And
when you guys did it with your Parkdale's Hooker band, was it a question of, okay, the mix is done and it sounds banging, it's awesome, and then you send it to the mastering engineer, or the mix is okay, it could be better, maybe the mastering engineer will fix this?
The first one, the mix was a little bit on the weak side, and the guy who was in the Philippines at the time did an amazing job and just made it like kick in a way it never did. with other stuff, the mix has been really, really good,
Mm.
but the mastering makes it that much better, makes it that much more polished, and it's for for special tracks that are important. It's well worth the money. I think it's well worth it's well worth the investment. Maybe not on everything, but if you want something to be heard on the radio, I would get it mastered professionally myself.
Yeah, sometimes it's the gear they run it through as well. Maybe they're running it through an analog chain as well. Some really expensive analog gear. It's amazing what some of that stuff can do. I can't afford it.
Well, and that's sort of my point earlier on. It's not just the fact that they have the gear. Like when I worked with Nick Lagona, and which was an amazing experience, intimidating, but amazing at the same time. He had this one plugin and he was using it, so I went out and I bought the same plugin. Guess what? My stuff didn't sound as good as he, because it's not the plugin that made the difference. It's the knowledge. And considering the first thing he ever did as a I think assistant engineer was Nights in White Satin by the Moody Blues. He had been around. He's passed away sadly, but like, it's not only is it the equipment, it's knowing how to use it. And again, that's a skill. There's people who all they do all day is just master. They don't mix, they don't produce, they don't track, they don't play, they just master. And sometimes expertise is worthwhile paying.
And you're getting another set of ears to listen to it, because you might be so used to what you're hearing, and then you give it to somebody else who's never really heard the track, and then wow, maybe they hear things you're not hearing. So that's another,
that to me is the biggest thing. It's like you spend forever working on these tracks and you lose all sense of objectivity by the end of that. Right? You need to send it to somebody else to get their take on it, and I'll do that. I mean, friends of mine do that with me too. They'll send me their mixes and be like, I've worked on this too long. What do you think? and I'll tell them it sounds too muddy. It sounds too whatever. The cymbals are too. Usually the cymbals end up being too loud. I don't know why people like loud cymbals. I'm a drummer. I don't want loud cymbals. But, yeah. It is an interesting question. I mean, I think. Yeah, absolutely. If you're going to go commercial, then it is good to have another set of ears on it that are well tuned and have never heard your stuff before, so they can be more objective about it and make those tweaks that can put a little bit of polish on it. If you are going to do it yourself, then it is a good idea to finish your mix, get it as good as you can possibly be like, this sounds great. There's nothing wrong with the mix, right? And then leave it for a few days and come back to it like the week later. And I operate mostly the same way that Don was saying, is I do my mastering sort of in the chain, like in within the mixed session. Like, I don't open up a separate session just to do a mastering, unless, like Don was saying, unless it's an album. Then because then it's a question of making all the tracks sort of vibe together, and there's sort of this same-ish loudness. Maybe the ballad wants to be a little bit quieter, but the hard rock one wants to be a little bit louder, and then tonally is one song muddier than the other ones, and we want to try and address that sort of thing. So mastering an album or an EP versus mastering a single song, very, very different creatures.
Absolutely.
So so there is that, and the whole streaming. I really like that site, the loudness penalty. I don't like that it's called loudness penalty, because to me it's not really a penalty. They're just turning your track down because they want it to be roughly the same level as everybody else's tracks. So like you say, the listener is not constantly adjusting the volume knob.
Yeah.
Right. And their target is quite low, like -14. I've never mastered any of my songs or any client songs to -14. It always ends up around -12, -11. Sometimes if it's a really dense mix, then it could be a lot higher. So then it ends up, they literally just take the whole thing and turn it down. You're right, if they have to turn it up, then it's a little bit of a problem, because then they're putting their own limiting compression on it that may.
But not all of them turn it up. So that's the
No,
problem.
turn
You're
it
going to
up.
be at a deficit if you're too quiet and you're on a streamer who doesn't turn people up. Your song's going to sound really quiet
Yeah.
if it's being streamed back to back to other ones. So that's why I always go high, because they all turn down,
Yeah.
but they don't all turn up.
There is a plugin called by the same people, ADPTR. I don't know if that's adapter or adapter. And it's called Audio Streamer, and it's basically meant for you finally eliminate all the guesswork and find out exactly how your masters will sound on all the major streaming services. And it's all sort of you can sort of A/B stuff. It gives you a lot of information about your dynamics and loudness and reference, and yeah, it's a great little thing for you putting out to streaming. I haven't actually used it myself because I haven't actually got to that point with some of the stuff I've been working on. But yeah, it's $29.99 at Plugin Alliance, and yeah, Audio Streamliner.
There's a great plugin I've been using, Ulean, 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 and like I say, independent developer. He developed a great metering plugin. There's a free version that gives you your LUFS, and you can set it to the Spotify parameter if you want, or whatever, or Apple. And then and it gives you the whole data readout of your entire song. I actually upgraded to the pro version because I kind of like the idea that you could export a graphic file of your LUFS reading and your dynamic range reading, which is pretty cool. And as well with the pro version, you can literally drag and drop a MP3 or a WAV file directly onto the plugin, and it'll just analyze it all in one shot, which you can't do with the free version. So, but it's a great start. Like, I used the free version for quite a long time, and then we had a sale. Yeah, same thing. It's like $20-$30 or something like that. And it's a good little metering plugin. It's always the last thing in the chain. Okay. And the other thing about streaming, guys, I don't know if you guys feel this way. I feel like some people out there are saying you need to do a different master for Apple and for Spotify, and like you say, Don, they're constantly changing. Just do one that sounds good, and that's it.
I mean, like, you'll pull your hair out.
You'll pull your hair. Yeah, you will. You're gonna try to master for every different thing. My God.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, and they're all gonna sound pretty similar anyway.
Yeah,
they're all gonna sound pretty close. Like, and not a big deal. But yeah, definitely go louder than their prescribed reference level, and you'll be fine. And not too much louder, because then you're slamming all the dynamics out of it. Unless that's what you want, because there is a Spotify loud as well. I'm not sure I know what the difference is. One's just louder than the other. Like, the LUFS level is higher, but I don't know. Maybe I don't listen to any Spotify louds on my Spotify. I don't know. Is it just for death metal? I don't know.
Is that a form of music? Like, is it like death metal, or like
I don't know, but there's two reference levels in the plugin. This is Spotify, and then there's another reference level for Spotify loud. So I don't know, when you submit to Spotify, are you submitting to Spotify regular, and then or you're submitting to Spotify loud? I'm not sure what the difference is. Maybe one of our listeners can let us know.
I don't know about that one, honestly. Also, too, make sure when you're doing your tracks that you stay 1 dB below peak.
Yeah.
There's another one that's important, because what happens is sometimes consumer grade DACs don't work too well, and you get this thing called intersample distortion or something. And what it's doing is like, say you're submitting to a streamer a WAV file or whatever, right? Well, it's going to be converted into something lossy eventually, MP3 or AAC. And when it goes through those codec conversions, sometimes there's overshoots. And if you don't give that 1 dB sample, you can, 1 dB down from peak, you might get some issues if you're right at 0, where it'll overshoot, and then that becomes distortion. And digital distortion doesn't usually sound as pleasing as analog distortion.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I always put my true peak at -1.
And you'll be safe then as well.
Some people say -3 for true peaks.
No, -1 is good.
I think -1 apparently
-1
is enough. Yeah. I've even seen people do it at
I haven't had a problem yet.
It's probably fine. Yeah, and me neither. But that's the other important point, actually, because LUFS, LUFS is an interesting loudness units full scale, and what LUFS integrated means it measures your entire song. It's supposed to be all these things, all this talk about metering is really they're all attempts to get a visual idea of how it sounds to the human ear in general for most people, right? Because like to express something visually that's an auditory thing is a really weird idea, right? And so bit by bit over the years, they try to get a little bit closer. And then what they're saying these days is that LUFS is supposed to be the most currently accurate representation of what loudness sounds like to us. And I don't know, there's some science behind that, whatever, right? But here's the interesting thing to me is the most important thing when I'm mixing or when I'm mastering is not the final level necessarily, but dynamic range. Dynamic range is really important. Is your highest peaks and your lowest valleys? What's the difference, right? And when they say -14, that is assuming that your peaks are at -1. You could be at -14 LUFS, and your peaks are at -6. Your dynamic range is a lot less than if your peak is at -1. Then you've got 13 dBs of dynamic range versus only 8 dBs of dynamic range. So that to me is the more important metric, is how dynamic is your song. And sometimes, a lot of the times, when you're just doing your preliminary mix and stuff like that, stuff is too dynamic, and you do want those compressors and things to sort of glue it together a little bit more. That's what I mean by glue. It just sort of sounds a little bit more solid, right? And that's really reducing the dynamic range. And of course, the danger is taking that too far and squashing it right out. With the latest song that I'm working on, I have a Native Instruments battery drum kit in there. It's kind of an industrial kit, and the snare sounded really loud and good, but as soon as I turned off the limiter on my master bus, the snare sounded way too loud. So something in my mix was funny, but my mastering chain just sort of magically fixed that snare drum, and it was kind of a bizarre thing because I've never really had that before. But it was just like, wow, that snare just sounds awful now as soon as I turned off the master chain stuff. So yeah.
Well, good thing we're not mastering for Atmos or something.
Oh yeah. Then you talk about is that surround sound? What is that?
Yeah, well, Atmos has 128 possible channels of sound, so you could have 128 sources of audio coming from there, and everything's got to be done to -18 dBSF, like everything, not beyond -18. Because what happens is, if you're listening on stereo and you've got a Dolby Atmos track, it'll fold it down to what you have. That's the great thing about it. It's not like quadraphonic where you had to have 4 speakers, right? Remember the old days, a long time ago, there was quadraphonic. Well, with Atmos, it'll fold it down to whatever it's coming out on. So when you've got all those things being folded down, all those tracks, if someone mixed in like 7.2.4, which means 7 speakers this way, 2 subwoofers, and then 4 on the ceiling. And if that gets folded down to 2 speakers, those individual channels can't be beyond -18, because when you fold them down, all of a sudden they're going to start creeping up, just like they do on your mix bus, and then it would be complete distortion, right? And you also got to make sure you work at 48K. 44.1 is out. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's why I've been working at 48K for years. I ditched 44.1 a long time ago because the video industry, Dolby Atmos is 48K, not 24-bit. That's the standard. And all the streamers want 24-bit 48K preferably, even though they may spit out 44.1 to accommodate maybe older DACs or whatever that people might be listening on. Right. So
yeah, most of the people I talk to, like in the industry, they happen to be all working at 48 and 24 and 48, 36 bit floating.
Oh yeah.
So one of those two. But But yeah, like then they use 48K just as a general combination between, size and speed. Some people go up to 96,000, which is really high. Maybe for classical music would make just a difference, but for most pop stuff, 48K sample rate at 24 bits is a good it's a good place to be.
Yeah, it'll future proof it for as well, right? And you can always dither down to 44.1 when you need to, right? So, but yeah, until Dolby Atmos goes to 96, maybe one day. The only reason they're keeping it 48 is because you got 128 possible elements. Imagine the file size.
Huge.
It's already big enough, and then you go to 96, it's double.
96, double, yeah. It's
So
gigantic.
Yeah,
chew up all your hard drive space. Whatever you do, just don't record at 16-bit. Always record at 24.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Definitely, that's actually more important.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Out of all of that, yeah.
I'll get into that necessarily. Okay. I think that about does it, guys?
I think so. I'll just make just one more thing is, again, you can't be great at everything. So, and the music industry is a people industry. So bring other people into your recording because you want more people. You want to know more people. You want to work with more people. You want more people to be your friends so that they'll recommend you to their friends. So if you're not a piano player, sure you can play piano and get by. Get a real piano player to do the track. Your track will just sound a million times better. Yes. As well as a guitar player or bass or especially drums. There's lots of ways of doing drums, but you get a good drummer, man, you can put anything on top of that. So don't feel bad about getting other people who are better than what you do to play on your track because it'll sound better and it'll be better for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's best to have everybody else around you better than you in the room.
For sure. For sure.
It's a good place to be.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And it happens.
I've been doing my whole life.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much me. Yeah. Okay, that's a great way to cap off our tips there, Phil. Thank you for that. And thank you, Don, for joining us. And
thank you, Don.
Where can our listeners see your crosstown music? Is it?
Yeah, crosstown sound, but there's not much there. I've been doing more protest or stuff against Metrolinx lately. So, yeah. There's all those videos. Go to Mount Dennis TV for that one.
Oh, Mount Dennis.
You want to see how to put up a teepee in a park?
Nice. All right, we'll put links to that in our show post, and we want to hear from you, our people. So send your comments, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram to @SongTalkRadio, or send us an email, feedback@songtalk.ca. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel and subscribe to the Song Talk Radio podcast on your favorite podcast provider, and find links to all the products, books, and web services and things we mentioned on our resources page. And join us at our next monthly Song Talk meetup, whether you're in Toronto for our in-person meetups or anywhere in the world for our online meetups. It's free to join on meetup.com and free to attend. Bring a song and a lyric sheet and get constructive feedback from other songwriters. Stop by songtalk.ca for the link. You can follow me at neomodi.com. You can follow Phil.
PhilEmery.ca.
And Don, what's your favorite social media? Where do you go the most?
Oh, I have Instagram. I don't use it a lot, but it's Don Thompson 777.
Cool. All right, and thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to stop by the website, songtalk.ca, to browse past shows, find out how you can be a guest. Thanks for tuning in, and keep on writing.
Good night, everyone.
Keep on producing. Keep on recording. Keep on mixing. Keep on mastering.
Keep on mixing. Keep
All
on
right.
writing.
Party time.
Ooh, Don's got the flashy lights.
There we go.
Oh, wow. If you're not on the YouTube channel, guys, you're missing out.
It's a good reason to tune in on YouTube, I guess.
That's right. It's the way to go.
Well, you won't see any of this on the podcast, I guess.
No, you can't see anything on the podcast.
Look into your speakers very carefully. Awesome stuff.
That's a cut. Okay, that was great, guys.
Shut off. Battery's getting low.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that, Don. That was fantastic. And that was a great show.
Yeah, that was really good. A lot of good tips there.
Yeah, you got a great studio, Don. I have much envy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, my friends are coming over. They may be banging on the door soon.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, they're not here. They're always late. I mean,
of course, they're musicians.
They're always late.
In one of the forums, they were saying that there's like this guitar pedal that can replace a drummer, and my reply to that is, Wow, so there's a drummer that shows up late drunk and tries to pick up your girlfriend
Yeah,
and then wants to borrow $50.
I recently wanted a little bit of feedback on a guitar track, on a virtual guitar track. I have Native Instruments Guitar Rig 6. There is no feedback pedal in Guitar Rig 6. So I went asking on social media, and I found actually a free plugin that sounds like guitar feedback.
Nice.
This is wild. And you can dial it in exactly the way you want it. And so it's like, I've got a feedback pedal.
Can you put a mic and a speaker and then
that's what people were suggesting. It's just like output it, put a mic by your speakers, put it back in, you do it the old-fashioned way, but I wanted more
that's
control.
Not going to be the same, because I use this. I got a small, you can't see it, it's my fingers right there. It's a small amp. My neighbor gave it to me because someone was throwing it in the garbage at his work. His brand new tiny little Squire practice amp. But what's really good about it is you put it close to the guitar and it doesn't rip your head off, but you can make the guitar feedback. And then but I got it split and I'm going into a real amp, a tube amp, and I'm getting that sort of feedback stuff happening with the interaction between the amp and the strings. So that's how you actually get good guitar feedback. You need a real guitarist.
Yeah.
It's
also hard to do it in a condo though.
Yeah, because you need volume, you need loud.
Yeah,
and then
but this is not too bad though. You can probably get away with it maybe in the afternoon in the condo for maybe 5 minutes,
for a couple minutes.
You do it once, and then that was it. But,
you do it once, not when the wife is home.
That's true.
Like, what the hell is that screeching?
Well, it's feedback, honey. You always said you wanted me to give you some feedback.
Yeah. I was looking for feedback on things. This is it. That's funny.
Wow.